The snow began falling before sunset on Christmas Eve, slow and silent at first, then heavier, as though the sky itself was lowering its voice in reverence for the night. And beneath that quiet snowfall, a young woman named Clara Whitmore lay curled against the frozen ground beside a broken wagon at the edge of the prairie road. Her breath came shallow and weak. Her stomach had stopped growling hours ago, settling into a hollow ache that felt almost peaceful in its emptiness. Her heart, though, weighed heavier than the clouds above her. She had believed Christmas would finally be the day her suffering ended. Yet here she was again, forgotten, hungry, and utterly alone. Clara had traveled for weeks with hope stitched into her coat like a hidden prayer. She clutched a folded letter that promised a home, a husband, and warmth beyond mere survival. A mail-order arrangement that had seemed like salvation when she answered it back east, where grief had hollowed her life and hunger had become as familiar as breathing. The journey west had been cruel. Crowded trains, strange faces, cold nights in stations where no one looked twice at a thin woman traveling alone. But she endured every mile, every hardship, believing the man waiting at the inn would see her as more than labor or burden. His name was Silas Blackwood. His letters had been short but promising. He owned land, he wrote. He needed a wife. He would provide. Those 3 words had been enough when her cupboard stood empty and her landlord's patience had run dry. But when the train finally dropped her at a small frontier stop called Miller's Crossing, no one was waiting. No wagon, no husband, no Silas Blackwood. She had hired the only available transport, an old wagon driven by a weathered man who charged her last coins and spoke no more than 10 words the entire journey. And when that wagon broke its axle 3 miles from anywhere, the driver had simply unhitched his horse and ridden away, leaving her with a broken promise and a broken wheel. That was 6 hours ago. Clara had tried walking, her boots soaked through within the first 100 steps, her dress growing stiff with ice. But the wind pushed her back like an unwelcome truth, forcing her to shelter beside the wagon where splintered wheels leaned like broken ribs against the snow. Now night had fallen completely. Christmas Eve, she thought weakly. The words felt like a cruel joke. She remembered candlelight and hymns from a childhood long gone. She remembered warmth she once took for granted, back when her mother was alive, back when her father's laughter filled their small house in Pennsylvania, back before the fever took them both in the same terrible winter, leaving her with nothing but debts and a hunger that never fully went away. How many prayers could be spoken before heaven grew tired of listening? Her hands were numb, her fingers barely able to move, yet she kept rubbing them together because stopping felt too close to surrender. Somewhere in her fading mind, she told herself that if she could just survive this night, morning would bring rescue. But deep down, she feared morning would never come. The prairie stretched endless and indifferent around her. Snow erased the road. The world narrowed to cold, hunger, and breath. As she rested her head against the wagon frame, Clara whispered an apology to a man she had never met. She believed she had failed him simply by arriving broken. "I am sorry, Mr. Blackwood. I tried. I truly tried." The cold crept deeper. Her thoughts grew fuzzy. Time slipped, strangely. Minutes stretching into hours, consciousness flickering like a dying lantern. She thought she heard singing somewhere far away. Christmas carols drifting across the snow. But it was only the wind, playing tricks on a starving mind. Then came a sound, faint at first, then unmistakable. Hooves. Clara lifted her head with what strength she had left. Her heart pounded weakly, afraid it might be imagination, afraid hope would hurt more than despair. But the sound grew closer, steady and strong, cutting through the storm like a heartbeat returning. A horse emerged from the snowfall, massive and dark, steam rising from its flanks. Atop it sat a man shaped by the land itself, broad-shouldered, wrapped in a heavy coat, his hat brim pulled low against the wind. When he spotted the broken wagon and the still figure beside it, he reined in sharply. His eyes narrowed, not with suspicion, but with concern sharpened by years of solitude. He dismounted quickly, boots crunching against snow. And though Clara could barely focus, she sensed the weight of his presence, solid and real, like the world itself had stepped closer. When he knelt beside her, she tried to speak, but no sound came. Her lips cracked, her throat too dry for words. The stranger took one look at her pale face, at the way her body trembled uncontrollably, at the empty basket beside her that had once held food now long gone. Something hardened in his expression, not anger, but resolve. And in a voice low and firm, a voice unused to being questioned, he spoke the words that would change everything. Get up. You are coming home with me. No one sleeps hungry on Christmas Eve. Not under my watch. Clara did not argue, did not ask who he was. Exhaustion had dripped away pride and fear alike. As he lifted her with surprising gentleness, wrapping his own coat around her shaking shoulders, she felt warmth for the first time in days. He placed her before him on the saddle, and the horse turned toward a distant glow she could barely see through the storm. She did not know his name. She did not know where he was taking her. But as her head rested against his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, Clara Whitmore allowed herself one small, desperate thought. Maybe this Christmas Eve, someone had finally heard her prayer. The ride through the storm lasted nearly an hour, though to Clara it felt like both an eternity and a single breath. She drifted between sleep and awareness, catching fragments of the world around her, the rhythm of the horse beneath them, the steady rise and fall of the stranger's chest against her back, the sound of wind gradually giving way to something quieter, calmer, as though the land itself was welcoming them home. When the gates of her ranch appeared through the falling snow, Clara thought she might be dreaming. A wooden sign hung crooked on the fence post, half buried in white. She could not read the words through her blurred vision, but she saw light glowing from windows ahead. Real light, warm light. The stranger guided his horse through the gate and brought them to a stop before a modest but sturdy house. Smoke rose from the chimney, curling into the night sky like a promise of warmth waiting inside. He dismounted first, then reached up and lifted Clara from the saddle as though she weighed nothing at all. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched ground, and without hesitation, he caught her and carried her toward the door. Inside, the house was simple but clean. A fire already burned low in the hearth, and he set her in a chair beside it before turning to add more wood. Flames leapt higher, warmth spread across the room like mercy. Clara sat motionless, too weak to do anything but absorb the heat. Her frozen fingers began to ache as feeling returned. Her cheeks stung. Her eyes watered. She was alive. The stranger moved through the house with quiet efficiency. He filled a kettle and set it over the fire. He retrieved a wool blanket from a chest and draped it over her shoulders. He pulled bread from a cupboard and sliced it thick, then ladled something from a pot that had been simmering on the stove. When he placed a bowl in her hands, the smell nearly undid her. Stew, simple and hearty, beef and potatoes and carrots in rich brown broth. Clara's hands shook so badly she could barely lift the spoon. The stranger noticed, and without a word, he guided her grip steady. Eat slow, he said. Your stomach has been empty too long. Take your time. She obeyed. The first spoonful was the most beautiful thing she had ever tasted. The second brought tears to her eyes. By the third, she was crying openly, tears streaming down her cheeks as she ate. Not from pain, not from fear, from relief, because someone had seen her. Someone had chosen her survival without asking for anything in return. The stranger watched from a short distance, saying little. His face was weathered, lined by sun and wind, and years of hard work. His eyes were dark and thoughtful, holding a depth that spoke of loss, though she did not know what kind. When she finally finished the bowl, he took it from her and refilled it without asking if she wanted more. She did. As the fire crackled and the storm raged outside, silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just present. Two strangers sharing warmth on the coldest night of the year. Finally, Clara found her voice. It came out rough, scratched raw from cold and disuse. Thank you, the stranger nodded once. What is your name, she asked. He considered the question as though names were things that required thought before giving. Elijah, he said at last. Elijah Stone. Clara Whitmore, she replied, though I suppose that hardly matters now. He raised an eyebrow. Why would it not matter? She looked down at her empty bowl. Because I was supposed to become someone else tonight. Someone's wife. I answered a letter, you see. A mail order arrangement. But he never came for me. And now I am here instead. Elijah Stone studied her for a long moment. His expression gave nothing away, but something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, perhaps, or understanding. "The man who sent for you," he said carefully. "What was his name?" "Silas Blackwood." The silence that followed was different from before. Heavier. Clara looked up and saw that Elijah's jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. "You know him," she said. "I know of him. Is he—" She hesitated. "Is he a good man?" Elijah did not answer immediately. He rose and walked to the window, looking out at the snow still falling beyond the glass. "You should rest," he said finally. "We can speak more in the morning. For now, you are safe. That is what matters." It was not an answer. But Claire was too exhausted to press further. He showed her to a small room off the main hall. The bed was narrow but clean, piled with quilts that smelled faintly of cedar. A single candle burned on the nightstand. "Sleep as long as you need," Elijah said from the doorway. "No one will bother you here." Clara turned to look at him, this stranger who had pulled her from death on Christmas Eve. "Why did you help me?" she asked. "You do not know me. You owe me nothing." Elijah considered the question. His answer when it came was simple. "Because it was the right thing to do, and because I know what it feels like to be alone when you need someone most." Before she could respond, he pulled the door closed behind him. Clara stood motionless for a moment, clutching the blanket still wrapped around her shoulders. His coat, she realized. He had given her his coat out in the storm, and she was still wearing it. She pressed the rough wool to her cheek and breathed in the scent of wood smoke and pine. Then she climbed into the small bed, pulled the quilts to her chin, and let exhaustion finally claim her. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the quiet house, a lonely man sat by the fire and wondered what Christmas morning would bring. Morning arrived quietly over the ranch, pale winter light slipping through frost-laced windows. The storm had passed, but its silence lingered like a held breath over the land. Clara woke slowly, confused at first by the warmth around her, the weight of quilts, the faint crackle of embers still alive somewhere beyond the door. Sensations so unfamiliar that her body tensed, waiting for them to vanish. Then memory returned in fragments. Snow, hooves, strong arms, a voice that had spoken certainty into her fear. She sat up carefully, afraid sudden movement might break the fragile reality. The room was modest but clean, built with function rather than comfort. Yet every detail spoke of care. A mended curtain, a swept floor, the faint scent of cedar rising from the quilts. She was safe, truly safe, for the first time in longer than she could remember. When Clara rose, her legs trembled. Her body ached from the ordeal of the previous night. But she steadied herself against the bedpost and took stock of her situation. Her dress, stiff with dried ice, hung over a chair near a small wood stove that someone had lit while she slept. Her boots stood beside it, stuffed with newspaper to draw out the moisture. A clean dress, simple brown wool, had been laid across the foot of the bed. Clara touched the fabric carefully. It was not new, but it was well made. A woman's dress, left here for her. She did not know what to make of that. After changing quickly, grateful for dry clothes against her skin, she opened the door and stepped into the main room. Elijah Stone stood at the stove, sleeves rolled to his elbows, shoulders broad beneath a worn cotton shirt. He moved with the unhurried confidence of a man who had lived alone long enough to find peace in routine. When he noticed her, there was no surprise, no awkwardness, just a nod that acknowledged her presence as though she belonged there already. "Coffee is hot," he said. "Breakfast will be ready soon." Clara approached the table slowly. It was a heavy oak piece scarred by years of honest labor, with 2 chairs tucked beneath. Only 2, she sat in one and watched him work. He set a plate before her without ceremony. Bread still warm from the oven, eggs cooked simply with salt and pepper, a thick slice of ham that sizzled at the edges, food that carried no luxury, but immense meaning. "Thank you," Clara said, "for everything. I do not know what would have happened if you had not found me." Elijah sat across from her with his own plate. He ate methodically, not rushing, not dawdling. "You would have frozen," he said, matter-of-factly. "Another hour in that storm and there would have been nothing to find." The bluntness startled her, but there was no cruelty in it, only truth. They ate in silence for several minutes. The fire popped and crackled. Wind whispered against the windows. Finally, Clara set down her fork. "That dress," she said, "the one you left for me. It belonged to someone. Elijah's chewing slowed. He did not look up. My mother, he said. She passed 3 winters ago. I am sorry. He shrugged slightly. It was a small motion, almost imperceptible. Not dismissive, just resigned. She would have wanted someone to use it. She hated waste. Clara nodded slowly. Then, gathering courage she did not know she still possessed, she began to tell her story. She spoke in pieces at first, not with dramatic words, but with quiet honesty. She explained how she had lost her parents in Pennsylvania, how the debts they left behind had stripped away everything, how hunger had hollowed her choices until answering a stranger's letter seemed less like desperation and more like the only door still open. She told him about Silas Blackwood's letters, the promises they contained, a home, a husband, security. She told him how she had sold the last of her mother's jewelry to buy the train ticket west, how she had traveled for 2 weeks with nothing but hope and a carpet bag containing everything she owned. And she told him how Silas had never come, how his letters had stopped arriving weeks before she left, but she had been too scared to turn back, too hungry, too tired of being alone. When she finished, Elijah was quiet for a long moment. His jaw had tightened again, just as it had the night before when she first mentioned the name Blackwood. This man, he said slowly, you have never met him in person. No, only his letters, and you traveled all this way based on words alone. Clara flushed with something between shame and defiance. I had no other choice. Perhaps you cannot understand what that feels like, but when you are starving, you will believe almost any promise that offers bread. Elijah looked at her then, really looked at her, and in his dark eyes she saw not judgment, but recognition. I understand, he said quietly, more than you know. He rose and walked to the window, staring out at the snow-covered fields beyond. His hands hung at his sides, fingers slightly curled, as though holding something invisible. Silas Blackwood, he began, is not a good man. Clara's heart stuttered. What do you mean? Elijah turned back to face her. His expression was carefully neutral, but she could see the tension in his shoulders, the hard set of his jaw. He owns a spread about 12 miles east of here, bought it 5 years ago with money nobody knows the source of. He goes through hired hands faster than most men go through boots, and there have been rumors. What kind of rumors? Women, Elijah said bluntly. Mail-order brides like yourself. 3, maybe 4 over the years. They arrive. They stay a few months. Then they vanish. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Vanish. Gone. Some say they ran off. Some say he sent them away. But nobody knows for certain because nobody ever sees them leave. The room seemed to tilt slightly. Clara gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. Why, she whispered. Why are you telling me this? Because you need to know what you almost walked into. And because, Elijah paused, weighing his words carefully, because I wrote a letter too. Clara stared at him. What? He moved back to the table but did not sit. Instead, he stood with his hands braced against the chair back, looking down at the scarred wood. I live alone, he said, have for years now. After my mother passed, the neighbors kept telling me I needed a wife, someone to share the work, someone to make the winters less quiet. He shook his head slightly, as if remembering something painful. I never wanted to, never believed I had anything left to offer except chores and silence. But last spring I was weak, lonely. I wrote a letter to the same agency you must have answered, described my situation honestly, said I was looking for a partner, not a servant, someone willing to build a life on the frontier. Clara's mind raced, trying to piece together what he was saying. And, she prompted, and no one replied, or so I thought. The weeks passed, then months. I assumed my letter had been lost or ignored, another mistake the prairie would swallow up and forget. He looked at her then, and something raw flickered in his expression. I never knew you were coming, never knew anyone was on their way. If I had, he stopped, took a breath. If I had, you would not have been left stranded in a snowstorm on Christmas Eve. The weight of his words settled over Clara like a second blanket. You wrote a letter, she repeated slowly, and I answered one. But we were matched to different men. It appears so. Then how, she struggled to form the question, how did Silas Blackwood receive my response instead of you? Elijah's expression hardened. That is exactly what I intend to find out. Clara sat very still, her half-eaten breakfast forgotten before her. She had escaped one fate only to stumble into another kind of mystery entirely. The man who had saved her was not the man she had been promised to. The man she had been promised to was apparently dangerous. And somewhere in between those two truths lay a tangle of letters, lies, and coincidences she did not yet understand. "What happens now?" she asked. Elijah pulled out his chair and sat back down across from her. "Now," he said, "you have a choice." "A choice." He nodded. "You can stay here until spring. Rest, recover, figure out where you want to go next. I will ask nothing of you except that you let me know if you decide to leave. No obligations, no expectations." Clara felt something tighten in her chest. "And if I choose to go to Silas Blackwood anyway?" To meet him, to see for myself, Elijah's expression did not change. "Then I will respect that decision. But I will also tell you that I think it would be a mistake, a dangerous one. You barely know me. Why would you care what happens to a stranger?" For a long moment, Elijah did not answer. Then he reached across the table and picked up the coat she had left draped over the empty chair. The coat he had wrapped around her in the storm. The coat that had probably saved her life. "This was my father's," he said quietly. "He wore it every winter for 20 years. After he died, I thought about selling it. Could have gotten good money for the wool, but I kept it instead. Not because I needed it, because some things matter more than practical sense." He laid the coat back down gently. "I found you dying in the snow on Christmas Eve," he continued. "I brought you into my home, fed you my food, gave you my mother's dress, and now I am telling you the truth about a man I believe would hurt you." His eyes met hers, steady and unblinking. "That is why I care. Because kindness is not something you measure out in equal portions to people who earn it. You give it because it is right, and because sometimes giving it saves you just as much as it saves them." Clara did not know what to say, so she said the only thing that felt true. "I will stay, at least for now, at least until I understand what happened with those letters." Elijah nodded once. "Then that is settled. You are welcome here for as long as you need." He rose and began clearing the dishes, and Clara watched him, this quiet man who had offered her shelter without demanding anything in return. She did not know what the future held. She did not know if Silas Blackwood would come looking for her, or what she would do if he did. But for the first time in years, she had something she thought she had lost forever. She had a choice, and that she realized was the most precious gift anyone had ever given her. The rest of the day passed quietly. Elijah showed her around the ranch, pointing out the barn where his 2 horses and handful of cattle sheltered from the cold, the chicken coop that needed mending, the smokehouse where salted meat hung from hooks, enough to last the winter. It was modest, but well-maintained, the work of a careful man who took pride in what little he had. Clara helped where she could, gathering eggs from the reluctant hens and carrying firewood from the pile beside the house. Her strength was still low, and Elijah insisted she rest often, but she found that movement helped clear her head. By afternoon, they had fallen into an unspoken rhythm. He chopped wood, she stacked it. He checked on the animals. She prepared a simple dinner from the supplies in the pantry. When evening came, they sat together by the fire, not speaking much, but comfortable in the silence. It was Clara who finally broke it. "Tell me about them," she said. "Your family." Elijah stared into the flames for a long moment. "There is not much to tell. My father built this ranch from nothing when I was just a boy. My mother made it feel like home. My sister," he paused, "my sister was the light of both their lives." "Was," Clara repeated gently. "She passed when she was 16. Scarlet fever. My mother never fully recovered from the grief. My father worked himself into the ground trying to fill the emptiness. By the time they were both gone, I was the only one left." "I am sorry," Clara said, and she meant it. Elijah shrugged, that same small motion from before. "It was a long time ago. I have made peace with it, mostly." He looked at her then, and she saw the vulnerability he usually kept hidden. "That is why I wrote that letter," he admitted. "Not because I wanted a wife in the traditional sense, but because the silence gets heavy after a while, even for someone who is used to being alone." Clara nodded slowly. "I understand," she said. "The silence is what drove me west. I thought marriage would fill it, but maybe she hesitated. Maybe it is not about filling the silence. Maybe it is about finding someone willing to share it with you. Elijah considered her words. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. It was a small smile, barely more than a slight upward curve of his lips, but it transformed his weathered face, softening the hard lines around his eyes. Maybe so, he said, and as the fire crackled between them, casting dancing shadows across the walls, Clara felt something shift inside her. Not romance, not yet, maybe not ever, but something gentler, something like hope. The days that followed Christmas settled into a pattern as steady as the sunrise. Clara woke each morning to the smell of coffee and the sound of Elijah already at work outside. She dressed in her borrowed clothes, now feeling less borrowed each day, and joined him for breakfast before the chores began. The ranch demanded constant attention. Fences needed checking after heavy snow. Animals needed feeding and watering. The woodpile needed constant replenishing as winter pressed its cold fingers against every window and door. Clara threw herself into the work with a determination that surprised even herself. Perhaps it was gratitude. Perhaps it was the need to feel useful after so many years of feeling like a burden. Or perhaps it was simply that physical labor left less room for the dark thoughts that had followed her west like hungry wolves. Whatever the reason, she worked, and slowly her strength returned. By the end of the first week, she no longer needed to rest after every task. By the second week, she had memorized the layout of the property, the temperament of each chicken, the particular sounds the barn doors made when the wind shifted from the north. And she had begun to understand Elijah Stone. He was not a man of many words. Some days passed with barely a dozen sentences between them. But Clara learned to read the things he did not say. The way he checked to make sure she had eaten enough before taking his own share. The way he always opened doors for her, not with grand gestures, but with quiet assumption. The way he listened when she spoke, really listened, as though her words carried weight. She learned his history through fragments. His father had been a Union soldier who came west after the war, seeking peace in the vastness of the prairie. His mother had been a school teacher from Missouri who traded books for butter and eggs, building a small library in the corner of the house that still stood untouched. His sister, whose name was Emma, had loved horses more than people and used to race Elijah across the fields until they both collapsed laughing in the tall grass. That was before the fever, before everything changed. Now Elijah lived alone with his grief and his cattle and his stubborn refusal to give up on the land his father had built. And somehow, impossibly, he had made room for Clara. One afternoon, as she helped him mend a broken section of fence, she found herself asking a question she had been avoiding. "Have you heard anything," she said, "about Silas Blackwood?" Elijah drove a nail into the fence post with a single powerful swing. "Not yet. I sent word to Sheriff Clayton in town, asked him to look into a few things quietly. Should hear back soon." Clara nodded, wrapping her arms around herself against the wind. "What if he comes here?" she asked. "What if he finds out where I am and demands I go with him?" Elijah straightened and looked at her. His expression was calm, but something fierce flickered in his eyes. "He can demand whatever he likes. That does not mean he will get it. But legally," Clara pressed, "I answered his letter. I agreed to marry him. Does that not give him some claim?" "No," the word was flat, absolute. "You are a free woman," Elijah continued. "You made an agreement based on promises he failed to keep. He was supposed to meet you. He did not. Whatever arrangement existed between you ended the moment he left you stranded in that snowstorm." Clara felt tension she did not realize she had been carrying begin to ease from her shoulders. "You sound certain." "I am certain. And if the law disagrees," Elijah picked up another nail and positioned it against the wood, "then the law and I will have words." He swung the hammer again, and Clara watched the muscles in his forearm flex with the impact. There was something reassuring about his quiet strength. Not aggressive, not threatening, just solid, dependable, like the land itself. She turned back to holding the fence post steady, but a small smile played at the corners of her mouth. That evening, after dinner, Clara asked to see the library. Elijah led her to the corner of the main room where a set of rough-hewn shelves stood against the wall. The books were worn but well cared for, their spines faded but intact. She ran her fingers along the titles. Shakespeare, Dickens, a collection of poetry by Longfellow, a thick family Bible with names and dates inscribed on the front pages. Your mother collected all these? Clara asked. Over 30 years. She believed books were the most important thing a person could own, more valuable than land or livestock. Clara pulled a slim volume from the shelf. It was a collection of Christmas poems, bound in red leather now cracked with age. May I, she asked? Elijah nodded. She carried the book to her chair by the fire and began to read aloud, her voice filling the quiet room with verses about snow and candlelight and miracles born in stable straw. At first, Elijah continued working on a harness he had been repairing, but gradually his hands stilled, and he looked up to watch her read. When she finished the poem she had chosen, she glanced up to find him staring. What is it? She asked. Nothing, he shook his head slightly. I just realized I have not heard anyone read in this house since my mother passed. I can stop if you prefer. No. He leaned back in his chair. No, please continue. Clara smiled and turned to the next poem. And so a new ritual was born. Each evening after dinner, Clara would choose a book from the shelves and read aloud while Elijah worked or simply listened. Sometimes they discussed the stories. Sometimes they sat in comfortable silence after she finished, letting the words settle around them like falling snow. It was during one of these quiet moments, nearly 2 weeks after Christmas, that they heard the sound of hooves approaching the ranch. Elijah was on his feet immediately, crossing to the window with the swift, silent movement of a man who had learned caution the hard way. Stay here, he said quietly. Clara set down her book, her heart suddenly pounding. Who is it? Elijah's jaw tightened as he peered through the frost-laced glass. I do not know, but I intend to find out. He pulled his coat from the hook by the door and stepped outside, closing it firmly behind him. Clara waited, straining to hear through the thick wooden walls. She could make out voices, but not words. One voice was Elijah's, low and steady. The other was higher, more animated. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened again and Elijah stepped back inside. Behind him came a younger man, maybe 25 years old, with a broad, friendly face and snow dusting his shoulders. Clara, Elijah said, this is Samuel Clayton, the sheriff's deputy. He brings news from town. Samuel removed his hat and nodded politely in Clara's direction. Ma'am, pleasure to meet you. Clara rose from her chair. Likewise, please sit by the fire. You must be frozen. Samuel grinned and moved gratefully toward the warmth. Much obliged. That wind cuts right through a man tonight. Elijah remained standing, his arms crossed. What news, Samuel? The deputy's cheerful expression sobered. The sheriff did some digging, like you asked, about that Blackwood fellow, and... Samuel glanced at Clara, then back at Elijah. You might want to sit down for this one, miss. Clara lowered herself back into her chair, her hands gripping the armrests. Just tell me, she said. Whatever it is, I need to know. Samuel took a deep breath. Silas Blackwood has had 4 mail-order brides over the past 5 years. Every single one of them disappeared within 6 months of arriving at his ranch. The words landed like stones in still water. Disappeared, Clara repeated. Gone. Vanished. No forwarding address. No letters to family back east. Just, he spread his hands, nothing. What happened to them? Elijah asked quietly. That is the thing. Nobody knows for certain. Blackwood claims they all left him. Says he gave them money and sent them on their way after things did not work out. But the sheriff checked the train records, the stagecoach manifests. None of those women ever bought tickets anywhere. Clara felt ice spreading through her veins despite the fire burning beside her. Are you saying, she started. I am saying there are questions that need answers, Samuel replied carefully, and Silas Blackwood is going to have to provide them. Has he been arrested? Elijah asked. Not yet. Sheriff does not have enough evidence. But he is watching him now, and he wanted Miss Clara here to know that if Blackwood comes around, she should not go anywhere with him, not until this gets sorted out. She will not, Elijah said flatly. Samuel nodded. Good. Sheriff also said you should let him know if Blackwood makes any contact. Letters, messengers, anything at all. Understood. The deputy rose, placing his hat back on his head. I should get back before the snow picks up again. You folks take care of yourselves. Thank you for coming all this way, Clara said. Her voice sounded distant to her own ears, as though someone else was speaking through her mouth. "Just doing my job, ma'am. You stay safe now." Elijah walked Samuel to the door and exchanged a few more words in low tones that Clara could not quite hear. Then the deputy was gone, and the sound of hoofbeats faded into the winter night. Elijah returned to find Clara sitting exactly where he had left her, staring into the fire with unseeing eyes. He pulled his chair closer to hers and sat down. "Clara," she did not respond. "Clara," he said again, more gently. Slowly, she turned to look at him. "I could have been one of them," she whispered. "If you had not found me, if that wagon had not broken, I would have gone straight to him, and I would have disappeared too. But you did not," Elijah said firmly. "The wagon broke. I found you. You are here, safe, and you are going to stay that way." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she did not try to stop them. "I thought I was so desperate that I had no choice," she said. "I thought answering that letter was the only way to survive. But I almost walked straight into something even worse than starving." Elijah reached out and took her hand. His grip was warm and steady, calloused from years of hard work, but impossibly gentle. "You did what you had to do with the choices you had," he said. "That is not weakness. That is survival. And now you have new choices. Better ones." Clara looked down at their joined hands. "Why are you so kind to me?" she asked. "We barely know each other." Elijah was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Maybe that is exactly why. Sometimes strangers can see each other more clearly than anyone else. No history clouding things, no expectations, just two people, right here, right now." He squeezed her hand gently. "And I see someone worth being kind to." Clara let out a shaky breath. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then slowly, Clara leaned toward him and rested her head against his shoulder. It was not a romantic gesture. Not exactly. It was something simpler, something more honest. It was trust. And Elijah sat perfectly still, accepting her weight, her tears, her fear, letting her know without words that she was not alone anymore. Outside, the wind howled, but inside the modest ranch house, the fire burned steady and warm, and two broken hearts began the slow, careful work of learning to beat together. 3 weeks after Christmas, the devil came to call. Clara was in the barn that morning, helping Elijah repair a broken stall door, when she heard the sound that would haunt her dreams for weeks to come. Hoofbeats, multiple horses, approaching fast. Elijah's head came up immediately, every muscle in his body tensing. "Go inside," he said quietly. "Who is it?" "Go inside, Clara. Now." Something in his voice brooked no argument. Clara set down the hammer she had been holding and moved quickly toward the barn's back entrance. But she was not fast enough. Before she could reach the house, a voice rang out across the frozen yard, sharp and cutting as a winter wind. "Well, well, so this is where my bride has been hiding." Clara froze. She knew that voice, not from memory, but from the tone described in those letters. Commanding, self-assured, accustomed to obedience. Slowly she turned. A man sat atop a black horse in the center of the yard. He was perhaps 40 years old, with a narrow face, thin lips, and eyes the color of dirty ice. His clothes were finer than anything she had seen since leaving the East. Too fine for a rancher, too polished for the frontier. Behind him sat two more men on horseback, hired hands from the look of them, hard-faced and silent. Silas Blackwood had come for her. Clara could not move, could not speak. Every warning she had received crystallized into a single moment of pure terror, as those cold eyes swept over her like she was livestock while being appraised for market. Then Elijah stepped between them. He moved with the easy confidence of a man on his own land. But there was nothing casual about the way his hand rested near his hip. Near the pistol Clara had never seen him wear before. "This is private property," Elijah said calmly. "State your business and leave." Silas Blackwood smiled. It did not reach his eyes. "My business," he drawled, "is with the woman behind you. My woman. She answered my letter, accepted my proposal, and traveled across the country to become my wife. And now I find her shacking up with another man like some common." "Choose your next words carefully," Elijah interrupted. "Very carefully." The two hired men shifted in their saddles, hands moving toward their own weapons. But Blackwood held up a hand, and they stilled. Now," he said smoothly. Let us be civilized about this. I have not come to cause trouble. I simply want what is mine. Clara, my dear. He looked past Elijah to where she stood trembling. Come along now. We can forget this little misunderstanding ever happened. Clara forced herself to speak. Her voice came out steadier than she expected. I am not going anywhere with you. Blackwood's smile flickered. I beg your pardon. You heard me. Clara took a step forward, drawing strength from Elijah's solid presence. I answered your letter in good faith. I traveled for 2 weeks to meet you, and you never came. You left me to freeze to death on Christmas Eve. Whatever agreement existed between us ended that night. Blackwood's expression hardened. There was a misunderstanding with the trains. I was delayed. Surely you do not blame me for circumstances beyond my control. I blame you for not sending word, for not making any effort to find me, for the fact that if this man, she gestured at Elijah, had not found me by chance, I would be dead right now. A dramatic interpretation, Blackwood said coolly, but irrelevant. You signed a contract. You are legally bound to me. There is no contract, Elijah said. I checked. Mail order arrangements are agreements of intent, not binding legal documents. She owes you nothing. For the first time, genuine anger flickered across Blackwood's face. You checked, he repeated. And who exactly are you to be interfering in matters between a man and his intended bride? Elijah Stone. This is my ranch, and Miss Whitmore is my guest. She is welcome to stay as long as she likes, and she has made it clear she does not want to leave with you. So I suggest you accept that and ride on. Or what? The question hung in the cold air. Elijah did not move, did not raise his voice. Or we will have a problem that your fancy clothes and hired muscle will not solve. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then Blackwood laughed, a thin, unpleasant sound. Very well, keep her for now. But this is not over, Stone. Not by a long shot. That woman belongs to me, and I always collect what I am owed. He wheeled his horse around and spurred it back toward the road, his hired men falling in behind him. Clara watched until they disappeared over the ridge, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Then her knees buckled. Elijah caught her before she hit the ground. Easy, he murmured, lifting her into his arms. I have you. You are safe. He carried her inside and set her in the chair by the fire, wrapping a blanket around her shoulders despite the fact that she was shaking from fear rather than cold. He is coming back, she whispered. You know he is coming back. Probably. What are we going to do? Elijah knelt before her so they were at eye level. We are going to be ready, he said simply, and we are going to protect what is ours. Clara looked at him, really looked at him. This quiet man who had saved her life, opened his home to her, defended her against a predator without hesitation. Why, she asked, why are you doing all this for me? Elijah was silent for a moment. Because you matter, he finally said. Because what happens to you matters. And because I spent too many years alone, letting fear keep me from caring about anything beyond these fences, I am not going to make that mistake with you. Clara reached out and touched his face, just a gentle brush of her fingertips against his weathered cheek. Elijah Stone, she said softly, you are the kindest man I have ever known. He caught her hand and pressed it briefly against his cheek, then released it. We should prepare, he said, rising. I need to send word to the sheriff. Strengthen the locks. Check our supplies. He was already moving toward the door when Clara called out, Elijah. He paused. Thank you. He nodded once. Then he was gone, striding across the yard with purpose, leaving Clara alone with the fire and the fear and the strange, fragile hope that had begun to bloom inside her chest. The next few days passed in tense preparation. Elijah reinforced all the locks on the doors and windows. He moved his horses to the back pasture where they would be harder to steal or harm. He taught Clara how to load and fire his spare rifle, insisting she practice until she could hit a target at 50 yards. I hope you never need to use it, he told her, but hope is not a strategy. Clara nodded grimly and kept practicing. Meanwhile, word spread through the surrounding ranches. The neighbors Elijah had kept at arm's length for years suddenly found reasons to stop by. A widow named Martha Brennan brought a basket of preserved vegetables and stayed for coffee. A young couple named Thomas and Lily Hartley offered to lend their hired hand if extra security was needed. None of them mentioned Silas Blackwood by name, but everyone knew why they had come. Solidarity, Martha explained to Clara one afternoon. We look after our own out here. Blackwood may have money and influence in town, but the prairie has a different kind of justice. Clara was moved by their kindness, but also afraid. I do not want anyone getting hurt because of me, she confessed. Martha patted her hand. Honey, you did not start this trouble. That snake Blackwood did, and it is about time someone stood up to him. Has he? Clara hesitated. Has he done this before? To others. Martha's expression darkened. There have been rumors for years, women who came and went, hired hands who quit suddenly, animals that turned up dead on neighboring ranches when their owners crossed him. Clara shuddered. How has he gotten away with it? Money? Fear? The fact that no one can prove anything? Martha sighed. But folks are talking now. The sheriff is asking questions. Maybe this time things will be different. Maybe, Clara echoed. But as she lay awake that night, listening to the wind howl outside her window, she could not shake the feeling that the storm was just beginning. The confrontation came sooner than anyone expected. It was a Sunday morning, gray and cold, when the riders appeared again. This time there were 6 of them. Silas Blackwood sat in the center, his black horse prancing with barely contained energy. His hired men fanned out on either side, each one armed. Clara watched from the window as Elijah walked out to meet them alone. Her hand gripped by the rifle he had taught her to use, the cold metal pressing against her palm. Blackwood did not bother with pleasantries this time. I have a legal document, he announced, pulling a folded paper from his coat, signed by Judge Morrison in Miller's Crossing. It declares Clara Whitmore to be my lawful property and demands her immediate surrender. Clara felt her blood run cold. Property. Elijah did not flinch. Let me see it, he said, holding out his hand. Blackwood hesitated, then leaned down and passed the paper over. Elijah studied it for a long moment. Then he looked up at Blackwood with an expression of utter contempt. Judge Morrison, he said slowly. The same judge who owes you $1,500 in gambling debts. The same judge who signed over the water rights to the Miller Creek last spring, even though half a dozen families had prior claims. Blackwood's smile faltered. I do not know what you are implying. I am not implying anything. Elijah folded the paper and tucked it into his own coat. I am stating facts. This document is fraudulent, and everyone here knows it. That is official court. This is toilet paper, Elijah cut him off. And if you think I am going to hand over an innocent woman based on the signature of a corrupt drunk who would sell his own mother for a bottle of whiskey, you are even more deluded than I thought. Blackwood's face twisted with rage. You will regret this, Stone. I promise you that. Maybe. Elijah's hand moved to rest on his pistol. But not today. Now get off my land before I help you leave. For a long, terrible moment, Clara was certain violence would erupt. But then Blackwood jerked his horse's reins and turned away. This is not over, he snarled over his shoulder. That woman is mine, and I will have her. One way or another, he spurred his horse and rode off, his men following close behind. Elijah stood motionless in the yard until they vanished from sight. Then he turned and walked back toward the house. Clara met him at the door, her face pale. What are we going to do? Elijah looked at her. For the first time, she saw something like fear in his eyes. We fight, he said quietly, and we pray that is enough. The lies came faster than the winter wind. Within days of that second confrontation, Silas Blackwood launched a campaign of destruction that had nothing to do with guns or violence. He attacked with words instead. Whispers began circulating through Miller's Crossing like smoke through dry timber. Stories about Clara Whitmore, about Elijah Stone, about what really happened at that isolated ranch. Clara first learned of it when Martha Brennan rode over with a grim expression and a heavy heart. Blackwood has been busy, Martha said, accepting the cup of coffee Clara offered. He is telling everyone in town that you are a fallen woman, that you seduced Elijah Stone and convinced him to steal you away from your rightful husband, that you are living in sin and corrupting a good Christian man. Clara felt sick. None of that is true. I know, honey. Most folks who know Elijah know it too. But Blackwood has money and influence. He has been buying drinks at the saloon, making friends with merchants, donating to the church. And people who do not know you are starting to believe him. Elijah stood in the doorway, his face like stone. What else? Martha hesitated. Tell me, Elijah said quietly. He is saying you kidnapped her, that she was confused and frightened when you found her, and you took advantage of her vulnerability. that you are keeping her here against her will. Clara's hands began to shake. That is insane. I stayed because I wanted to, because he saved my life. I know, Martha repeated. But Blackwood is a smooth talker, and he has been painting himself as the victim, the heartbroken husband whose bride was stolen by a jealous neighbor. Husband, Clara exclaimed. We were never married. We never even met. He is telling people you were married by proxy, Martha explained, before you left the East. He has documents, apparently. Witnesses. Forged, Elijah said flatly. Probably. But proving that takes time. And in the meantime, the damage is being done. Clara sank into a chair, overwhelmed. This cannot be happening. Elijah crossed the room and knelt beside her. We will fight this, he said firmly. The truth is on our side. But if no one believes us, Clara whispered, then we make them believe us. He rose and turned to Martha. Who has he convinced, specifically? Martha sighed. Judge Morrison, obviously. But you already knew about him. A few of the merchants on Main Street. The Reverend Collins, unfortunately. And, she paused, and Sheriff Clayton? Elijah went very still. The sheriff believes him. Sheriff Clayton has known Blackwood for years. They served together in the militia back in '73. When it comes down to your word against Blackwood's, Martha shook her head. I am sorry, Elijah. The sheriff is not on your side. Clara looked up at Elijah and saw something she had never seen before. Despair. Just a flicker. Just a moment. But it was there. Then it was gone, replaced by that iron determination she had come to rely on. Then we find another way, he said. There has to be evidence somewhere. Proof of what Blackwood really is. Those other women who disappeared, they did not just vanish into thin air. Someone knows what happened to them. How do we find that proof? Claire asked. Elijah was quiet for a moment, thinking. Blackwood has hired hands who have worked for him for years, men who have seen things. If one of them could be convinced to talk, he trailed off. Those men are terrified of him, Martha warned. They would never betray him willingly. Then we need to find someone who is not afraid. Someone who has nothing left to lose. Clara looked at him. Like who? Elijah's expression hardened. Like me, he said. 3 years ago, when Blackwood first moved into the county, he tried to buy my ranch. I refused. 2 weeks later, a fire broke out in my barn. I lost 3 horses and nearly lost my own life. Clara felt her breath catch. You think he set that fire? I know he did. I could never prove it, but I know, and I also know he has done far worse to others who crossed him. Then why, she struggled to understand, why has no one stopped him before now? Because fear works. Because money talks. Because people would rather look the other way than risk becoming his next target. But you did not look away, Clara said quietly. You stood up to him when he came for me. Elijah's eyes met hers. Some things are worth fighting for. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Martha cleared her throat. Well, she said briskly, standing up, if we are going to fight, we should probably start by rallying the troops. I know at least a dozen families who have been waiting years for someone to stand up to that snake. They will help. How, Elijah asked. By telling the truth. By vouching for you and Clara. By showing up and making it clear that Blackwood cannot bully everyone into silence. That could be dangerous for them. Life on the frontier is dangerous, Martha replied simply. But living under a tyrant's boot is worse. People know that. They just need someone to lead the way. She pulled on her coat and headed for the door. I will spread the word. You two stay safe and stay together. And for heaven's sake, she added with a slight smile, do not give anyone any real ammunition. After she left, Clara and Elijah sat in silence for a long moment. Finally, Clara spoke. What happens now? Elijah sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Now we wait, and we prepare, and we pray that our friends are stronger than our enemies. And if they are not, he looked at her and, despite everything, managed a small smile. Then we fight anyway, because some battles are worth fighting even if you lose. Clara nodded slowly. Then she did something that surprised them both. She reached out and took his hand. Elijah looked down at their interlaced fingers, then back up at her face. Whatever happens, Clara said quietly, I want you to know something. You have already saved my life twice. Once from the kid cold and once from that monster. Even if everything falls apart, I will never forget what you did for me. Elijah's grip tightened on her hand. It will not fall apart, he said. I will not let it. And despite the fear churning in her stomach, despite the uncertainty of everything ahead, Clara believed him. Because in all her life, no one had ever fought for her the way Elijah Stone was fighting now. And that, she realized, was worth more than all the security in the world. The next week was a blur of activity. Martha Brennan proved as good as her word. Within days, ranchers and farmers from across the county began arriving at Elijah's homestead. Some brought food, some brought weapons, all brought determination. Thomas Hartley, the young husband from the neighboring ranch, took charge of organizing a patrol rotation. 3 men would ride the perimeter at all times, watching for any sign of Blackwood or his hired thugs. Lily Hartley helped Clara fortify the house, boarding up vulnerable windows and stockpiling supplies in case of a siege. And a grizzled old rancher named Samuel Pike, who claimed to have known Blackwood for 20 years, provided the most valuable contribution of all: information. Samuel gathered everyone around Elijah's table one evening and spread out a hand-drawn map. "Blackwood's ranch is here," he said, jabbing a finger at the paper. "Main house, bunkhouses for the hands. Barn. But there is something else. A storage building back behind the horse pasture. He keeps it locked at all times. No one goes in or out except Blackwood himself." "What is in there?" Elijah asked. "Nobody knows for sure, but I knew a man who worked for Blackwood 5 years back. Name was Tom Henderson. Good man, honest worker." Samuel's face darkened. "Tom told me once that he saw Blackwood coming out of that building late at night. Saw him locking it up, looking around like he was afraid someone might be watching. Tom said Blackwood was carrying something wrapped in cloth. Something heavy. Bodies," Clara whispered. "Maybe." Tom never found out for certain. 2 days after he told me about it, he disappeared. Blackwood claimed he quit and rode off in the night. But Tom never collected his last month's wages, never said goodbye to his family, just vanished. The room was silent. "We need to get into that building," Elijah said finally. "That is suicide," Thomas Hartley protested. "Blackwood has guards patrolling his ranch around the clock. You would never get close." "There has to be a way," Claire insisted. Samuel rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "Maybe not a break-in," he mused, "but if we could find someone who knows what is in there, someone willing to talk." "Like who?" "Like Ben Murray." Samuel looked around the table. He used to be Blackwood's foreman, worked for him for 8 years. Then something happened. Nobody knows what exactly, but Ben quit suddenly and moved to a cabin up in the high country. Has not spoken to anyone in years. You think he knows something? I think if anyone knows Blackwood's secrets, it is Ben Murray. The question is whether he will share them. Elijah stood up, his decision made. "Then I am going to find him. And I am going to ask." Clara grabbed his arm. "It is too dangerous. What if Blackwood finds out where you are going?" Elijah looked at her with that quiet determination she had come to rely on. "He probably will," he said. "But some risks have to be taken. If Ben Murray can give us the evidence we need to bring Blackwood down, it will be worth it. Then I am coming with you." "No, Elijah." Clara, he cupped her face gently in his calloused hands. "You are the one Blackwood wants. If you leave this ranch, you become an easy target. You need to stay here where our friends can protect you." "And what about protecting you?" Elijah smiled slightly. "I have been looking after myself for a long time. I will be fine." Clara wanted to argue, wanted to insist, but she saw the truth in his eyes. He was doing this for her. All of it. The least she could do was trust him. "Be careful," she whispered. "Always." He pressed a brief kiss to her forehead, so light she barely felt it. Then he was gone, riding into the darkness toward the high country and a secret that might save them all, or destroy them. The cabin was exactly where Samuel Pike said it would be. Elijah found it after 3 days of hard riding, tucked into a narrow valley between 2 mountain ridges. Snow clung to the steep slopes on either side, but the valley floor was clear except for a frozen creek and a small structure that looked more like an accident than intentional architecture. Smoke rose from a crooked chimney. Someone was home. Elijah dismounted and led his horse the last 100 yards on foot, not wanting to spook whoever waited inside. His pistol sat ready at his hip, but he hoped he would not need it. When he reached the cabin door, he knocked twice and stepped back. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the door creaked open, and a face appeared in the gap. The man who looked out at Elijah was perhaps 50 years old, with wild gray hair, and a beard that reached his chest. His eyes were sharp despite their wariness, and the shotgun he held was steady in his hands. "Who are you?" the man demanded. "What do you want?" "My name is Elijah Stone. I have a ranch about 40 miles south of here. Are you Ben Murray?" The name triggered something in the man's face. Fear, recognition, something darker. "I do not know anyone by that name." "You got the wrong place." He started to close the door. "Silas Blackwood," Elijah said quickly. The door stopped. "A woman is in danger," Elijah continued. "A good woman who answered a mail order letter meant for me. Blackwood claims she belongs to him. He is spreading lies, corrupting officials, doing everything in his power to get her back. I need to stop him. And I am told you know things that could help." For a long moment, Ben Murray stood frozen in the doorway. Then he opened it wider. "Get inside," he growled, "before someone sees you." The cabin's interior was as rough as its exterior. A single room with a cot in one corner, a wood stove in another, and precious little in between. The walls were bare except for a faded photograph tacked above the cot. A woman's face, young and pretty, smiling. Elijah did not ask about it. Ben set down his shotgun and gestured toward a wooden stool near the stove. "Sit. Talk. Tell me everything about this woman and what Blackwood wants with her." Elijah sat and told the story from the beginning. Clara's letter, the broken wagon, the rescue on Christmas Eve, the threats, the legal documents, the rumors poisoning the town against them. When he finished, Ben was silent for a long time. "He sounds like the same man," Ben said finally. "The same devil in a gentleman's coat. You worked for him. 8 years. Ben's voice was heavy with old bitterness. "I was his foreman, ran his entire operation, knew every inch of that ranch and every dirty secret it held." "What secrets?" Ben looked at the photograph on the wall. "That is my daughter," he said, "Rebecca. She was 23 years old when Blackwood set his sights on her." Elijah felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What happened?" "She was beautiful, sweet-natured, innocent. Blackwood claimed to be in love with her, asked my permission to court her. I was a fool. I thought he was respectable. I thought she would be safe with him." Ben's hands clenched into fists. The wedding was planned, invitations sent, dress made. 3 days before the ceremony, Rebecca came to me, crying, told me things about Blackwood, terrible things, said she could not marry him, said she would rather die. Elijah waited, barely breathing. "I confronted him," Ben continued, told him the wedding was off. He laughed in my face, said Rebecca belonged to him now and there was nothing I could do about it. That night, Rebecca disappeared. Disappeared. Gone, no trace. Blackwood swore he did not know where she was, said she must have run off. But I knew he had done something to her. "What did you do?" I started digging, asking questions, checking places he did not want checked. "The storage building," Elijah said. Ben nodded slowly. "I broke in one night when Blackwood was in town. What I found," he stopped, swallowing hard. "What I found still haunts me." "What was it?" Ben rose and walked to a loose floorboard in the corner of the cabin. He pried it up and pulled out a leather satchel, worn and weathered. "Take this," he said, handing it to Elijah. "Letters, documents, photographs, proof of what Blackwood really is. I have been hiding up here for 3 years, too scared to come forward, too broken by grief." Elijah opened the satchel and began leafing through its contents. What he saw made his blood run cold. Letters from the other mail-order brides, desperate pleas for help that were never sent, sketches of the property showing unmarked graves, and worst of all, a journal in Blackwood's own handwriting detailing his crimes in chilling detail. "This is enough to hang him," Elijah said quietly. "More than enough. But it will not matter unless someone brings it to the right people. Judge Morrison is in Blackwood's pocket. Sheriff Clayton, too. You need to take this to the federal marshal in Denver. He is the only one with the authority to act. Denver is over 200 miles away." "I know. And if Blackwood attacks Clara while I am gone..." Ben looked at him steadily. "Then you need to decide what matters more. Destroying Blackwood forever, or protecting one woman for a few more days." Elijah stared at the contents of the satchel. It was an impossible choice. But even as the thought formed, he knew there was really only one answer. "I will go to Denver," he said. "But first I need to get word to my friends. Make sure Clara is protected while I am away." Ben nodded. "There is a trading post about 20 miles south. You can send a telegram from there. Good. Elijah tucked the satchel inside his coat and rose to leave. One more thing, Ben said. Yes. The old foreman's eyes burned with something beyond grief. When they hang that bastard, I want to be there. I want to watch him die for what he did to my girl. Elijah met his gaze. You will be there, he promised. I will make sure of it. The ride to the trading post was long and brutal. Snow began falling before Elijah reached the valley's edge, and by the time he descended into the lowlands, visibility had dropped to nearly nothing. He pushed his horse as hard as he dared, knowing every hour of delay put Clara at greater risk. At the trading post, he sent 2 telegrams. The first went to the federal marshal's office in Denver, requesting urgent assistance and briefly outlining the evidence he carried. The second went to Thomas Hartley at the ranch, warning him that Elijah would be delayed and urging him to prepare for the worst. Then Elijah bought what supplies he could afford and rode south through the storm. It took him 6 days to reach Denver, 6 days of cold and hunger and sleepless nights, 6 days of imagining all the terrible things that could happen to Clara while he was gone. But when he finally walked into the federal marshal's office and laid Ben Murray's satchel on the desk, all of that suffering felt worthwhile. The marshal was a gray-haired man named Harrison with a reputation for honesty and a deep hatred of corruption. He read through the documents in silence, studied the photographs, examined the journal. When he finished, his face was the color of ash. This man has been operating under our noses for years, he said quietly. How many women has he killed? At least 4, Elijah replied. Maybe more. And the local law has done nothing. They are bought and paid for. Harrison slammed his fist on the desk. Not anymore. I am personally leading a team back to Miller's Crossing. We will arrest Blackwood and everyone who enabled him. This ends now. How soon can you leave? Tomorrow morning. It will take us about a week to reach the county with a full posse. A week? Elijah felt dread coiling in his stomach. Can you send men ahead to protect the woman? Harrison shook his head regretfully. I do not have enough deputies for that, but I can send a telegram to every sheriff's office along the road, warning them what is happening. That is not enough. It is all I can offer. Elijah stood motionless, his mind racing. Then I am riding ahead, he said, tonight. I need to be there when you arrive. Harrison studied him. You care about this woman. I love her. The words came out before Elijah could stop them, and as he heard them spoken aloud, he realized they were true. He loved Clara Whitmore. He had loved her since the moment he lifted her from the snow on Christmas Eve. He had loved her through every quiet evening by the fire, every shared meal, every moment of trust and vulnerability they had built together. And he would die before he let Silas Blackwood take her from him. Harrison must have seen something in his face because he nodded slowly. Ride fast, he said. We will be right behind you. Elijah rode through the night. He rode through snow and wind and darkness that seemed to press against him from all sides. He rode until his horse was staggering with exhaustion and his own body screamed for rest. And when dawn broke on the 7th day, he finally saw the familiar outline of the mountains rising in the distance. Home, Clara. He spurred his horse forward with renewed determination. But as he crested the final ridge and looked down at where his ranch should have been waiting, his heart stopped. Smoke was rising from the direction of his property. Too much smoke for a cook fire. Too much smoke for anything good. No, he whispered. Then he was riding again, faster than before, racing toward whatever disaster awaited him below. The barn was fully engulfed when Elijah reached the ranch. Flames leaped 30 feet into the air, orange and terrible against the gray winter sky. Smoke billowed in thick black clouds, and the sound of the fire roared like a living thing, hungry and relentless. But worse than the flames was what Elijah saw in the yard. Bodies. Thomas Hartley lay crumpled near the water trough, blood seeping from a wound in his shoulder. 2 of Blackwood's hired men lay nearby, unmoving, and in the center of it all stood Silas Blackwood himself, dragging a struggling figure toward a waiting horse. Clara. She fought against him with everything she had, kicking and scratching and screaming. But Blackwood was stronger, and his grip on her arm did not waver. Let her go, Elijah roared. Blackwood spun at the sound, and for just a moment, surprise flickered across his face. Stone. You were supposed to be in Denver. I came back. Elijah dismounted in one smooth motion, his hand already on his pistol. "Let her go," he repeated. "This is over. The federal marshal knows everything. They are coming for you. There is nowhere to run." Blackwood's expression twisted into something ugly. "If they are coming, then I have nothing to lose." He pulled Clara in front of him like a shield, and Elijah saw the flash of a knife pressed against her throat. "Drop your weapon," Blackwood commanded, "or I swear I will cut her open right here." Elijah froze. His eyes met Clara's. She was terrified, tears streaming down her soot-stained face. But beneath the fear, he saw something else. Trust. She trusted him. Slowly, Elijah raised his hands. "All right," he said. "All right, let us talk about this." "There is nothing to talk about." Blackwood edged toward his horse, keeping Clara between himself and Elijah. "You ruined everything. I had plans for this county, plans that are now worthless because of you and this worthless woman." "Clara," Elijah said softly, "do you remember what I taught you about the rifle?" She blinked. "The stance I showed you." "The way to pivot." Blackwood's eyes narrowed. "What are you muttering about?" "Do you remember?" Elijah pressed. Clara swallowed hard. Then almost imperceptibly, she nodded. "Then do it now." Everything happened at once. Clara dropped her weight suddenly, throwing off Blackwood's balance. She twisted, exactly as Elijah had taught her, and broke his grip just enough to create space. Elijah drew his pistol and fired. The bullet caught Blackwood in the shoulder, spinning him around. The knife flew from his hand and landed in the snow. Clara stumbled away, gasping. Blackwood howled with pain and rage. He lunged toward Clara, hands reaching for her throat. Elijah fired again. This time the bullet hit true. Blackwood staggered, looked down at the red stain spreading across his expensive coat, and crumpled to the ground. For a moment, everything was silent except for the roar of the fire. Then Clara was in Elijah's arms, sobbing against his chest, and he held her so tightly he feared he might break her. "It is over," he murmured into her hair. "It is over. He cannot hurt you anymore." "I thought," she choked, "I thought you were not coming back. When the fire started, when his men attacked, I thought I would never see you again." "I will always come back," Elijah said fiercely. "Always, no matter what." Behind them, Thomas Hartley groaned and stirred. Martha Brennan appeared from behind the house, helping Lily Hartley carry buckets of water from the well. Others emerged from various hiding places, shaken but alive. The barn was lost, but the house still stood, and more importantly, the people who mattered had survived. The federal marshal arrived 4 days later with a posse of 12 men. They found Silas Blackwood barely alive, his wound having festered despite Martha's grudging attempts to keep him breathing. He was chained to a bed in Elijah's house, too weak to speak but conscious enough to understand when Marshal Harrison read him the list of charges: murder, kidnapping, fraud, corruption, and 6 other crimes too numerous to detail. Blackwood would hang. The marshal's men searched his ranch from top to bottom. In the storage building Ben Murray had described, they found exactly what Ben had feared. Graves, 4 of them, hidden beneath the dirt floor. The remains were carefully exhumed and identified where possible. Letters were sent to families back east. Answers were finally given to questions that had haunted loved ones for years. And in Miller's Crossing, things began to change. Judge Morrison was arrested for his role in Blackwood's schemes. Sheriff Clayton was forced to resign in disgrace. A new sheriff was appointed, a fair man named Williams, who owed nothing to anyone. The merchants who had believed Blackwood's lies came forward to apologize, one by one. Reverend Collins preached a sermon about the dangers of bearing false witness and asked Clara for forgiveness publicly. She gave it, because she understood that fear could make people do terrible things, and because holding on to anger would only poison her own heart. Spring came slowly to the prairie that year. The snow melted in stages, revealing the damage beneath. The barn was gone, nothing but charred timbers and ash. Fences had been torn down in the attack. The chicken coop had been trampled. But as the weather warmed, something miraculous happened. The neighbors who had rallied to protect Clara now rallied to rebuild. They came from every ranch in the county, bringing lumber and nails and strong backs. They raised a new barn in 3 days flat. They mended fences and repaired the coop. They brought chickens and a milk cow and seeds for a garden. It was more than Clara had ever dared to hope for. And through it all, Elijah was by her side. They worked together from dawn until dusk, falling into bed exhausted each night. They talked about everything and nothing, learning each other's rhythms, discovering the small joys that could be found in a life built together rather than apart. One evening, as the sun set over the newly raised barn, Clara found Elijah sitting on the porch, staring at the horizon. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, settling beside him. He was quiet for a moment. "The future," he said finally. "Our future." Clara's heart stuttered. "Our." He turned to look at her. In the golden light of sunset, his weathered face seemed almost soft. "Clara Whitmore," he said slowly. "I have never been good with words, never been one for grand speeches or romantic gestures. But I need you to know something." She waited, barely breathing. "I love you," he said. "I think I have loved you since the moment I found you in that snowstorm. And I know we started this as strangers, as two people thrown together by circumstances beyond our control. But somewhere along the way, you stopped being a guest in my home and started being the reason I wanted to come home at all." Clara felt tears pricking at her eyes. "Elijah, I am not asking you to decide anything right now," he continued quickly. "I know you have been through more than anyone should have to endure. I know trust takes time, but if you ever find yourself ready, if you ever think you might want to build something real with a stubborn old rancher who probably does not deserve you," he took a deep breath, "I would be honored to call you my wife." Clara was silent for so long that Elijah began to fear he had made a terrible mistake. Then she laughed. Not a mocking laugh, not a nervous laugh, a joyful one. "Elijah Stone," she said, "I have been waiting for you to ask me that for weeks." His eyes widened. "You have. Of course I have." She reached out and took his calloused hands in hers. "You saved my life. You protected me from a monster. You gave me a home when I had nothing." And somewhere along the way, she squeezed his fingers. "I fell completely in love with you." Elijah stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. "Is that a yes?" Clara smiled. "That is a yes." And as the sun sank below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, Elijah Stone pulled Clara Whitmore into his arms and kissed her for the first time. It was not a dramatic kiss, not the kind poets wrote about or singers immortalized. It was gentle, patient, full of promise. The kind of kiss that said this was only the beginning. The trial of Silas Blackwood lasted 3 days. It was held in Denver, far from the county where his influence had once held sway. Federal prosecutors presented Ben Murray's evidence with devastating precision. Witnesses testified about disappearances, threats, and violence. Clara herself took the stand on the second day. She spoke clearly and honestly, without drama or embellishment. She told the jury about the letter she had answered, about the wagon that broke, about the Christmas Eve snowstorm that should have killed her. And she told them about Elijah Stone, the man who had saved her life and asked nothing in return. When she finished, several members of the jury were wiping their eyes. Blackwood's defense attorney tried to paint her as confused, manipulated, seduced by another man. But the evidence was too overwhelming, and the lawyer's arguments fell flat. On the third day, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on all counts. Silas Blackwood was sentenced to hang. The execution was scheduled for the following month. Ben Murray made the journey down from his mountain cabin to watch, just as Elijah had promised. Clara and Elijah stood beside him as the sentence was carried out. It was a grim day, not one for celebration. But as Blackwood dropped through the trapdoor and the rope went taut, Clara felt something lift from her shoulders. Something heavy and dark that had been pressing down on her since that terrible Christmas Eve. "It is done," Elijah said quietly, his arm around her. "Yes," Clara replied, "it is finally done." They rode home together in silence, the weight of what they had witnessed settling slowly. But by the time they reached the ranch, the heaviness had begun to fade, because waiting for them was not grief or fear, but hope. The neighbors had decorated the porch with wildflowers. A banner hung across the front door with crooked letters spelling out "Welcome Home," and standing in the yard, beaming with pride, was Martha Brennan holding a book. "I spoke to Reverend Collins," Martha announced. "He says he will be honored to perform the ceremony whenever you are ready." Clara looked at Elijah. Elijah looked at Clara. "How about right now?" he said. The wedding was simple and perfect. No elaborate dress, no grand cathedral, no hundreds of guests. Just Clara and Elijah standing before Reverend Collins in the yard of the ranch they had fought so hard to protect. The neighbors who had become family circled around them. Flowers from Clara's new garden decorated the porch. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Clara wore the brown wool dress that had once belonged to Elijah's mother, now carefully altered to fit her. In her hands, she held a small bouquet of wildflowers picked that morning. Elijah wore his best shirt, clean and pressed, with his father's coat draped over his shoulders. The same coat he had wrapped around her in the snowstorm on Christmas Eve. The same coat that had started everything. Reverend Collins kept the ceremony brief, sensing that these two people needed no elaborate rituals to seal what already existed between them. Do you, Elijah Stone, take this woman to be your wife, to love and cherish, in sickness and in health until death do you part? I do. Do you, Clara Whitmore, take this man to be your husband, to love and cherish, in sickness and in health until death do you part? I do. Then by the power vested in me, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride. Elijah kissed Clara gently, reverently, as cheers erupted from the gathered crowd. And as they pulled apart, forehead to forehead, Clara whispered words only he could hear. Thank you for finding me. Elijah smiled, that rare, precious smile that still transformed his weathered face. Thank you for staying. The reception was a joyous affair that lasted well into the night. There was food and music and dancing under the stars. Children chased each other between the tables while their parents laughed and reminisced about everything that had led to this moment. Clara and Elijah moved through the celebration together, hand in hand, accepting congratulations and well wishes from everyone they knew. But as the hour grew late and the guests began to drift home, they found themselves alone on the porch, exactly where the proposal had happened weeks before. The same stars, the same quiet, but everything else had changed. Are you happy? Elijah asked. Clara leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. Happier than I ever thought possible, she said. A year ago, I was starving in a boarding house in Pennsylvania, answering a letter I thought was my only hope. I never imagined it would lead to this. The letter was a mistake. Was it? Clara looked up at him. If that letter had not been mixed up, I never would have been on that road on Christmas Eve. You never would have found me. We never would have met. Elijah considered this. I suppose you are right. Sometimes, Clara said softly, the best things in life come from the worst mistakes. Sometimes the broken wagon leads you exactly where you need to go. Elijah pulled her closer. Then I am grateful for every mistake that brought you to me. They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the stars wheel overhead. And Clara knew with absolute certainty that she was finally home. 5 years later, the Stone Ranch was unrecognizable. Where once there had been a modest homestead struggling to survive, now stood a thriving operation that stretched across 300 acres of prime prairie land. The barn Elijah's neighbors had raised after the fire had been expanded twice. A second house had been built for the hired hands. And the garden Clara had planted that first spring had grown into an orchard. But the greatest changes were not measured in acres or buildings. They were measured in love. Clara stood on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in familiar shades of gold. Her hand rested on the curve of her belly, round with their third child. In the yard below, two small figures chased each other between the fence posts. Emma, named for Elijah's lost sister, was 4 years old with her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn spirit. Daniel, just 2, toddled after her on unsteady legs, laughing at everything his sister did. Elijah emerged from the barn, dusting hay from his shoulders. When he spotted Clara on the porch, his face broke into that same rare smile that still made her heart skip. He climbed the steps and stood beside her, one arm wrapping around her waist. How are you feeling? Heard Clara admitted, but happy. They watched their children play as the sky darkened and the first stars appeared. Do you ever think about that Christmas Eve? Elijah asked quietly. Every day. Any regrets? Clara laughed softly. Only that I did not answer your letter sooner. Elijah kissed her temple. I love you, Clara Stone. I love you too, Elijah Stone. More than words can say. From the yard, little Emma shouted, Mama, Papa, come play with us. Clara and Elijah exchanged a glance. Then together they walked down the porch steps to join their children. Years later, when people asked Clara Stone about her life, she always told them the same story. She told them about the Christmas Eve when she thought she would die alone in a snowstorm, about the cowboy who rescued her without expecting anything in return, about the villain who tried to destroy them and the community that rose up to fight back. And she told them about love, not the kind found in fairy tales, not perfect or effortless, but the kind that grows slowly like crops in spring soil, the kind that survives hardship and emerges stronger, the kind that is built day by day, choice by choice, through patience and trust, and the courage to open your heart to another person. That is the real miracle, Claire would say. Not being rescued from the snow, not surviving the danger, but finding someone worth building a life with and having the courage to do it. Her children would roll their eyes at the familiar story. Her grandchildren would listen with wide eyes, imagining cowboys and snowstorms and Christmas Eve magic. But Elijah always listened like he was hearing it for the first time, because to him, the story never got old. It was the story of how two broken people found each other in the wilderness. The story of how kindness rippled outward, touching everyone it reached. The story of how one act of courage on a cold winter night created a legacy of love that would outlast them both. And every Christmas Eve, no matter how many years passed, Elijah and Clara would sit together by the fire and remember the snow, the hooves, the moment everything changed.